Chair, for the kind words. Reverend Sirs, members of the head table, friends and colleagues, and ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Sarath has given you a good review of what is constitutional law, which is a mixture of law and politics, and how it works in different countries in Sri Lanka. I will not enter into that area because I will speak mostly from an international perspective on the constitution making process in Sri Lanka. Constitution making process has taken more than 2 years. Unfortunately, there is no draft bill at the moment for the people of Sri Lanka to make any comments or recommendations. It is likely that the constitution making process might drag on ad multos annos unless a more pragmatic approach is taken to conclude successfully the constitution making process. In this context, the most important political issue at the moment is to consider whether the 1978 Republican Constitution should be amended or repealed and replaced by a new Republican Constitution. Some constitutional experts feel that the present government has not received the requisite mandate at the last parliamentary elections in the 1970 elections as in 1970 and 1977. Therefore, they claim the government will not be able to obtain approval of the people at a referendum, and if they fail to win the referendum, it will have tremendous political repercussions. In these circumstances, it is best for me at the very initial stages to evaluate the process which is taking place now in Sri Lanka. At this point, it is useful to take the process evaluation by reference to the experience of other countries, how the process is used for constitution making, and our own experiences in constitution making as I described herein. The process followed when I was in Trinidad and Tobago in the West Indies was very different. The government appointed Sir Hugh Wooding, the famous Chief Justice, and chairman with constitutional and drafting experts to work on the constitution. They published a very informative book titled Thinking Things Through, in order to ascertain the views of the general public in a structured manner through discussions, seminars, and workshops. In other words, they educated the masses while putting this book through and ascertained from them what they feel it should be like. The draft bill prepared by them was considered by the Select Committee of Parliament before its enactment through the legislative process. It is somewhat similar to that process followed by late President Jayawardena in the preparation and drafting of the Second Republican Constitution, although the presidential system was introduced by him as an amendment to the First Republican Constitution. At the time, I followed the Select Committee discussions because I was a senior legal draftsman at the time in 1978, and I went to the discussions in Parliament and I watched these great people, how they work with constitution making. So it made a permanent impression on me, and I enjoyed how the process was handled at that stage. Likewise, Mr. Karu Jayasuriya, who was then a member of parliament, initiated the 17th Amendment to the constitution, established good governance in Sri Lanka. He once called me and gave me a report in order to draft the 17th Amendment to the Constitution. He understood that I have returned home and he had made some thing, and he just called me. Various provisions of the draft bill which I drafted was criticized by Mr. Choksi, at the time the advisor to many people, and there was another gentleman called President's Council called Sibley Assis. The UNP hierarchy, including the present Prime Minister, attended the meetings on the draft constitutional provision at the Mayor's House, and to my amazement, it went through Parliament. Once the draft was finalized, it was referred to the OPA for scrutiny by various stakeholders. There is something unusual in this, is that in the history of our Parliament, constitutional amendment has never been initiated by the opposition, and this is the first time it ever happened, not only in Sri Lanka, in anywhere in the world, because constitutional amendments usually brought by governments in power and not by the opposition. But it was also not done willy-nilly, because I would not have been able to draft this 17th Amendment, because I did it on the basis of a recommendation of Mangala Munasinghe's NGO at a place called Marga Institute. I know my cousin who's here, Ranjit Senratna, he was at the Marga many years ago, and at that time I went there and he gave me this copy, and I found it was a very exhaustive policy guideline for me, and I was at home with it because it was better than any policy guidelines, and it was comprehensive, and it was done very well by whoever did it, I do not know, and it was produced. In contrast, the preparation of the drafting of new constitution, the present one, follows a different process. It has gone on a different rail track. All suggestions made by the public or various committees of the Parliament are taken into account in the preparation of various reports, and still I was told they are in the reporting stage after 2.5 years. The whole Parliament is converted into a constitutional assembly. In a sense, there are many cooks involved in the making of the constitutional soup, and no one knows which way the process will finally end. So I think too many cooks might spoil the soup, might happen at the end of the day. I don't know. In this context, the Prime Minister may have a difficult task, and he is unable to move unless he makes constitutional proposals attractive to almost all parties. I have now going to take you to few amendments which I think should be taken, whether it's a presidential government or whether it's a parliamentary system of government. These are my ideas which I've borrowed from many countries and which are of some value even to Sri Lanka, which is a multi-ethnic country where I live. They also fight blacks and Indians, and it's like this. It's a deja vu. I mean, I saw the same thing in other parts of the world, not very different. The following are the amendments which I think should be made to the 78th Constitution if it does not follow the Westminster model, or whether it follows even the Westminster model. These must be there in the draft Constitution. First is that every person has a right to life, unless such right is limited by any law enacted by Parliament in public interest. Some of the rights should be there. In some countries, euthanasia has been recognized. Some countries, right to abortion has been recognized. So right to life is there, but there may be limitations in certain parts of the world. Second is, in Article 12.1, in a very important case before the Supreme Court recently, the challenging of when you challenge fundamental rights in a case called Noble Resources International Private, where there was a what you call a Mohan, what is it? There was a tender, no? There was a tender. This Sri Pavan's judgments, a tender in which the tenderer was not a Sri Lankan, but he was a Singaporean, and he didn't belong to a company which was incorporated here. Sri Pavan crossed the red line and said that even if he is not a Sri Lankan, I will hear this case, because although strictly he did not have what you call locus standi, but nonetheless Justice Siripavan, who was at the time Chief Justice, gave it. I feel that there should be some areas, even if you are attracting investors, they should also be able to challenge if they are discriminated under some of the provisions of the Constitution. I said in that context, I think in Article 12.1, citizens includes, to put a explanatory or what you call a definition, any investor who has invested or is willing to invest in Sri Lanka. So the justice has crossed the line, we can cover in an amendment in the future. Third is, our Constitution 78 does not have any rules relating to interpretation. Most of them, from the very high place to the bottom, interpret this in the way they think is right, which is not correct. Because if you have a list of MPs who should be selected, it should be from the list, because if you look at the Trava Preparatory or the preparatory documents of the constitution making process under the 78 Constitution, the list was introduced. I can still remember, reverberates in my ear, when J.R. Jayavarman said we must put some good people in the list and they should be elected to the House according to the proportional representation, this thing. But this was completely disregarded recently, because we are not interpreting the Constitution from the top to bottom in a manner inconsistent with the criteria adopted by many countries in regard to constitutional interpretation. So I thought under 28G, there should be some clause, duties of all our citizens, whether it's a Chief Justice, President, or even humble High Court judge, or even a magistrate, whoever it is, maybe, or even a bureaucrat. When he refers to the Constitution, when he has to interpret it, he must interpret the provision of the Constitution purposefully and in a manner consistent with the principles and provisions of the Constitution, with particular reference to sovereignty of the Parliament, people, fundamental rights, and directive principle of state policy, with a view to establishing constitutional harmony. So I thought something like the South African Constitution, the principles where they put of constitutional, there are lots of other countries. Third point, I think, whether we follow any model, our way we ratify treaties is terrible, in a sense that most countries, there's a constitutional principles in UK Parliament. When you ratify a treaty, Parliament is informed, and sometimes you need to get the approval of Parliament. There was something called the Ponsonby Rule under Erskine May, which discussed, and these are brought to play in the parliamentary proceedings in, I remember, in the Bahamas, and so forth and so on. So you can't, treaty obligations can't be just done the way you want. So I thought there should be a provision in the Constitution in terms of the constitutional practice in the UK and other dualist states in this form. When Sri Lanka becomes a state party, I think it should come in 28A. a treaty which affects the security of Sri Lanka, its sovereignty and independence, unity or territorial integrity, such treaty shall not enter into force unless it has been approved by Parliament in accordance with the Constitution. Such a provisions will certainly put an end to most of the way we handle treaties in our legal system. Then I also feel, I mean, this is highly controversial. I think if you want to play by Vienna rules of give and take, you understand? Those are Vienna rules. In 1815, Vienna had the first treaty, because that is why he called the Vienna Brut. The famous Strauss composed this song when 1815, because after Napoleon had rampaged Europe, and still they didn't want to punish France. Probably he says that it is not because they didn't want to do anything against France, because Metternich's sister was in love with the foreign minister of Vienna. So they had a very soft way of handling the devastation, and it was called give and take policy, Vienna Brut. And in that sense, we must have something very clear on presidential candidates. But I thought that any person, we must put this in the Constitution, who is supported by or who is nominated by one party, all right, well, listen to me very carefully, and if he becomes a president or a prime minister, whatever, that person should not still continue to be a member of another party, because party system is axiomatic for the functioning of democratic governance. If you don't have two parties, as I lived in Africa, I can tell you, that is the entry point to one-party state and dictatorial governments. So if you have one man in one foot in one party and another foot in another party, there is going to be instability and problems with Sri Lanka. So I think we should have a proviso to section 31 once, provided that such person, when elected as president, shall become a member of the political party that nominated him as presidential candidate. That should be the case. Then there is a division between political parties. If you have two legs in both parties, next step is they will say we will have one party, and that means that is a recipe for complete domination by politicians, our rights and our future. So I also feel that whether the presidents have 2 terms or not, it is also very controversial. In some countries, the president has 2 terms, or even 3 terms, 4 terms. In most countries I have worked in the Caribbean, where the presidential system, they have 2 successive terms, but he is entitled after that lapse to, like in Putin, now he came back again. So that is also another issue. So there can be very strict situations if you are going to have a give and take constitutional negotiation or bargaining, and to get this through, all those have to be cleared in the debris of on the new constitution. Finally, I don't think we should expand our ministerial portfolios beyond a certain point. It was fixed 30, but national government came and upset the whole thing. That should be a strict bar, whether national, whether coalition, that should remain at 30, as determined by this thing. So now I also feel there must be something to implement the devolution. They also have, it's a Tamil question, it's a national question, devolution of power, whether we should consider it a little more carefully. After all, I feel the power has been devolved, and provincial council have been established. It was not done by us. It had to be done because of the short-sighted policy followed by President Jayawardena. Whatever said and done, we can't. We must be, as I lived in some countries, I've also felt the same all the time, that we being so close to India, we have to be very careful as far as matters relating to India is done. So in that sense, he made a mistake. He felt that we could control India by aligning itself with the United States, but he knew at once it was a mistake, and a mistake has to be rectified by acceding to the Indo-Lanka Accord. They did shake him a little bit. So it is now law, and we must, now that come into effect, we must try and see how it could be implemented. And I also feel that we are talking so much of reconciliation, bringing justice among various races and so forth. Other countries also have this problem. They have what is called an Ethnic Relations Commission. Now I have seen how it operates in Guyana, Trinidad, the Bahamas, Dominican Republic, all have people from different countries, the blacks, the Indians, and they have managed ethnicity in a more cultured and a more regulated manner by establishing an Ethnic Relations Commission and a tribunal. Immediately they are punished if they cross that red line. So we must, if we want to have ethnic harmony, first thing I would think is that we must study the experience of other countries. We don't have to transplant it bodily word to word, but we must study and see whether that fits into, and I think it will fit in, because the problems of ethnic issues are the same, hate speech, all those are the same, and they find immediate solutions for these problems under the Ethnic Relations Commission. So I don't want to speak at length. Those are my preliminary observations. Unless some of these provisions are contained in the new constitution, whether it is Westminster model or whether it is a presidential model, it will not be a successful exercise. Let me finish by quoting, saying, constitutional making process should be designed to bring stability to the constitutional order of Sri Lanka. The presidential system of government established by late Mr. J.R. Jayawardena brought stability to Sri Lanka to deal with major issues confronting us. Both President Premadasa and President Rajapaksa used such powers very well towards rapid economic progress. They did so. Late Dr. N.M. Pereira, I met him many, many times during the time it was done, criticized the presidential system, and I wrote a book in Sinhala, and I have it here still, and it has not been sold by my mother. I left it behind. He said, why did you write in Sinhala? I would have English, I would have sold it. You wrote in Sinhala. So it is, I have it. It's a very good book. I found it very interesting reading after 40 years from my old house. And then I began to read. It's a good book. And I used to go to the Center for Society and Religion and listen to the 11 speeches made by Dr. Indem. And it was very, very good. But I disagree with him. But he never had any vengeance over me when I spoke against his criticisms. Two different parties, last year, but it will lead to deadlock. He said this constitution, 78 constitution, will lead to deadlock. He has proved right when President Chandrika Bandaranaike dissolved parliament in 2003 in an unconstitutional manner. Hence, the present presidential system should be modified if it is still adopted to prevent abusers, as described in my book, published 40 years ago in Sri Lanka. මම මෙතනින් මගේ වචන සුවල්පය අවසන් කරනවා. මේ ආණ්ඩු ක්‍රම ව්‍යවස්ථාව හා සංශෝධ ඒක ක්‍රියාවලිය පිළිබඳ මම වචන කීපයක් සඳහන් කළා. මට ඉංග්‍රීසි භාෂාවෙන් හා සිංහල භාෂාවෙන් ඕනෑම ප්‍රශ්නයක් පිළිතුරු දිය හැකි. ඒ නිසා මම කියපු දේශනය මම කියපු වචන ස්වල්ප ගැන විමර්ශනයක් කිරීමට ඔබට අයිතියක් තියෙනවා කුමන භාෂාවකින් වුණත්. ඒ ගැන මගෙන් ප්‍රශ්නයක් ඇහුවොත් ඒ භාෂාවෙන් පොඩ්ඩක් දෙමළත් කතා කරලා ඇයි මම ඒකේ මම අච්චරම හොඳට බෑ. නමුත් මේ ඉංග්‍රීසි භාෂාවෙන් සහ සිංහල භාෂාවෙන් මට පිළිතුරු දිය හැකියි. බොහොම ස්තුතියි.